Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Roundabout Town podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, coming to you from downtown Jackson, Tennessee, right here at the Downtown Public Library. And today I have a guest that I've been wanting to have on the show for quite a while. I first met this guest some years ago when she was a student in one of my Spanish classes that I teach at UT Martin. And then for a time, she became one of the anchors on morning TV right here in Jackson, Tennessee on station WBBJ. I'm sure you perfectly recognize who I'm talking about. She also ran for office as county commissioner, and now she has founded a newspaper in town, the Jackson Post, and that's what we want to talk about quite a bit today on the show, Roundabout Town. Welcome, Julia Ewoldt.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Garcia Fernandez.
Well,
it's good to see you.
You don't need to call me doctor anymore. We're not in an academic context.
Some things stick around.
Well, how does it feel like to be interviewed when actually you conduct interviews?
It's different, that's for sure. I feel like I know a little bit more of what to expect, but at the same time, I don't know what to expect. And so it's just a little bit different being on this side.
So you've been working as a journalist for a while, and I wondered, how and why were you attracted to journalism, to working in newspapers and media?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Hardin County, Tennessee, and our local high school had a radio station. They had a newspaper that they contributed to, and then the radio station. And I got involved in that when I was in high school, and it wasn't long after that where I got good at it. I wasn't very good when I first started, but I practiced a lot because I really enjoyed it. And my teacher said, why don't you do this for a living? You can do that, And so I didn't think it was an option when I first got into radio. So I ended up finding out that UT Martin has one of the best radio and journalism programs in the country. I mean, they're ranked as the #1 college radio station in the country year after year after year. And I always wanted to go to UT Martin. So it really worked out. There was a plan in place. And I went to UT Martin and got my degree in journalism. And while I was still at UT Martin, I got hired at WBBJ and worked my way up at that station.
But what was it about, journalism that kind of drew you in?
I tell people, when I go talk to students and I talk to kids' classes, there's a couple of things. The first thing is I love storytelling. Anytime that I can sit in a classroom or a lecture hall or anything like that, and you tell me a story, I'm intrigued. I love to hear it. The second thing is I compare the stories that we write, the stories that we produce, as work that you're proud of, that you want to stick on the fridge at the end of the day. If you were someone who grew up enjoying bringing your good grades home or something like that, showing your parents, and they put it on the fridge, that's what journalism is about. You get to share it with everyone, the work that you've done. And so that combination has really led to me working in multiple different mediums in journalism.
Do you remember watching the news or reading newspapers as a kid or not?
A little bit. I remember specifically my local newspaper, The Courier, and seeing my friends' faces in it, seeing all the things going on in downtown Savannah, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then when things got featured, in the Jackson Sun or on WBBJ, it was a huge deal. And I wanted to be the person behind it, telling the huge deal, getting people excited about it.
And so you went to UT Martin to study journalism, to study communications and all that sort of stuff. How much do you think college classes actually prepare you for the day-to-day work of a journalist that's actually on the field?
I think anyone will tell you that college classes, you need that baseline. You need to learn Associated Press style. You need to learn the ethics of journalism, communication law, how to run equipment, things like that. But the first 3 months in a newspaper, TV station, wherever, are going to be the hardest 3 months of your life. Just figuring out that workflow, figuring out how to interact with people and how to tell stories.
Yeah, you said that you got hired at WBBJ, an important local television channel here in Jackson, while you were still at UT Martin. Now, that doesn't sound like something that's very common, or is it? How did that happen?
I look back and I'm like, how did I do that? Because I was still in college. I was a senior in college. It was my last semester, and I thought to myself, I better get on this. I better figure this out. I didn't know how anything worked. And so I started applying at some different places, and I came to Jackson, and I walked straight into the news director's office at WBBJ, and I said, I saw you have some job openings. I want to work for you. I can only imagine what the news director was thinking at the time. Like, who is this girl? What is she doing? Like, what is going on here? And he was like, I'm not hiring you as a reporter. Like, you go to school full time in Martin. And so I actually started working in production on January 2nd, 2018, driving down from Martin to be at work at 4:30 every morning, while I was still in college, going to class, doing sorority activities till 10, 11 o'clock at night.
There's only 24 hours in a day.
Only 24 hours. I don't know how I made it. And so at the end of that semester, I think I had missed like 3 days working in production, even with like snow, and I had a coyote going to work one day. They didn't believe me at first. I was like, no, I can't drive the car. And just, a multitude of different issues driving in the middle of the night, an hour away. I did it. And they hired me on as a reporter that May. I started the Monday after I graduated from college. And then a couple months later, they needed a Saturday morning anchor. So I became the Saturday morning anchor. And then a couple months later, they needed a full-time weekday anchor. So I became the full-time weekday anchor. And I remember continuously thinking to myself, I'm 22 years old. And they are letting me produce a newscast by myself. No one proofreading this. Go on air by myself. Like, they are letting me run wild in this building. And they trust me to do that. And it was a huge honor, honestly, because I don't know very many 22-year-olds who are able to do that. It was also terrifying.
I was also always impressed by that. And I wondered, how important was this experience that you got, actual, experience doing all of these things when you're 22. How important do you think this has been in your career so far?
I think knowing what I wanted to do at a young age has allowed me to do this. And then just not stopping when probably I should take a break. I just haven't stopped. But when the pandemic hit and my co-anchor and I were having to do a lot, they had us pretty busy around there, along with the trauma that you face while covering something like a pandemic and having to be immersed in people's stories every single day, and all of that over and over and over again, with the pressure that you face and things like that. It got tiring. It got
must be really exhausting.
It was exhausting, especially, you're waking up at 2:30 every morning and working 12-hour days, nonstop, no lunch breaks or anything like that, just because you got a job to do. And I'm not saying like my job was anywhere near important as the doctors, nurses, governmental officials who are mitigating the pandemic, but interacting with them every day, you put on some of that stress. And so UT Institute of Agriculture offered me a job in 2021, and it was the best thing I could have done. Oh my goodness. Working for UT is a great experience, and you are surrounded by wonderful people, good folks, as everyone says, like, oh, you work with some good folks. And that was a really good experience for me. But ultimately I got bored real fast. And unsurprising when you go from TV station to PR. And, so I got with Brandon Shields, who, well, first, before we get to that, I was like, I got to do something. And I loved working with the governmental officials. I loved being involved in our community. And so I was like, maybe I'll just run for office and see what happens. And that was an amazing experience. If anyone is looking to run for office or anything like that, it changed my point of view on everything. It changed my perspective. It changed the way that I think about campaigns. And even I did not win. And I was going up against a guy who's been county commissioner for 30 years and is well loved by his community. And so great for him, great for our community. It was the best experience I could have had as a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
Did I know I was going to be getting back into journalism when I was running for county commission? Absolutely not. But looking back, you can see, oh, this makes sense. This makes sense. And I'm able to give a new perspective on how we cover politics in Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
That being said,
but how did that experience actually, affect the way that you see the city, the way that you perceive, politics in the town?
So I ran as an independent.
Mm-hmm.
For county government, you can claim a political party, a Democrat, Republican, Independent.
Mm-hmm.
And the Republican Party in Jackson is very organized,
Mm-hmm.
extremely organized. They pick the people who are running for office.
Mm-hmm.
They fund them. They get behind them. And it's really interesting to see. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, isn't as organized.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that at play with the way that the races are run, who is winning, how it's funded, even into the boardroom itself. So the Board of County Commissioners in their meeting, the Republicans run the show. And being on the side of the election where I'm interacting with both sides of the party system as an independent,
Mm-hmm.
I got the feel, I got the vibes. I saw the dynamics a little bit better. At the same time, I learned the structure of running for a county office, what forms you need to file, what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, how voting works and early voting works. And hey, did you know you could go look up and see who voted and what primary they voted in? You can pull that information right in front of you. So there was a lot of things that I learned that, looking on the outside, I might not have realized until I got into the thick of it.
So did that experience also spur you on to start this newspaper?
Yes. Something that Jackson and Madison County faces and has faced for several years now is a lack of information and intentional good communication. And I saw that with the election. We do not have a good early voting system. The early voting system is 5 days a week from 9 to 4 or something like that. If you work an 8 to 5, how are you supposed to get there? And then half a day on Saturday. So A, that. B, there's no public transportation that brings you to early voting. So how are people who don't have transportation supposed to get there? C, people don't know who they're voting for because there is no communication about who is running. You have to go actively search these people out and figure out what they're about. The only thing that informs you is the R or the D or the I next to their name. And so that lack of communication that I've learned while running was also what's kind of sparked this. And I had been, more and more, I was inching towards like, we got to do something. We got to do something. And that was a great question because it absolutely did.
And, I'm very interested because the Jackson Post appeared on my mailbox, one day. And then I realized you were tied into this newspaper, that it was a new newspaper that had just been founded. And I'm wondering, I can understand how the idea came about for founding this newspaper, but I was wondering if you could maybe walk us
Absolutely.
a little bit through the process of, getting the funds, taking care of all the logistics, getting the project started, because that sounds, to somebody who is a college professor and has done that all his life, all his working life at least, that sounds like a daunting project.
It's overwhelming. And the good news is I handle a very, very small portion of this. So, as I said earlier, I was so bored at UT. I love UT so much, but it's not for me. And it isn't for some people. And so Brandon Shields, who used to be the editor at the Jackson Sun, had also recently left news. He was working at a PR firm. And we were chit-chatting one day about some old stories we had covered. And I said, why don't we just start a newspaper? Like, why don't we just do it ourselves? I had been doing some research on nonprofit papers and how to start those, because I'm very interested in the concept of not-for-profit news. And I've done all this research, all these different things. I'm really hyper-focused on all of this. And Brandon said, Julia, don't worry about it. I was actually approached by a guy about a year ago who wanted to start a newspaper in Jackson. Well, golly, like 90% of the work was taken out from under us and really just taken care of. So the owner of this newspaper, his name's Daniel Richardson, and he owns Magic Valley Publishing in Camden, which is right up the road. And he owns 15 papers across West Tennessee and a printing press in Huntington. So he is able to start from finish, have a local newspaper. And it wasn't 6 weeks later that Brandon was on staff after that initial conversation with me talking with Brandon. And then it was about a month and a half later that I got on staff. So it's been really good so far. And we're crazy, folks, because who starts a newspaper in 2022?
That was one of my questions. You're asking it aloud yourself, but that was one of my questions. You have, the Post has, and as I see it, you have an online and a print edition. And what I like is that there is a print edition, personally, right? But I wonder, what are the differences between the online edition and the print edition of the Jackson Post?
People tell me all the time, and I heard it in college all the time, print is dead, print is dead, print is dying. No one wants a paper copy. But what you just said is what everyone says when I talk to them. I love the print edition. I love holding a newspaper. It gets delivered to your house once a week. And it is a compilation of that week's news. So the print edition is really what we're focused on and getting that in people's hands. You got the advertisements on it, you got the opinion sections, and it's a really good compilement of Jackson news. It's very intentional too. The online edition, and that's going to be worked on a little bit more in the future, it's going to be the same as the print, but we're just going to make sure people are paying for it, because you got to pay for news. We need money. We need a job. I'm not doing this for free. So right now it's free to everyone and all of our stories are going online, but pretty soon it's going to be subscriber only content. It's $50 for a whole year, and you get an edition mailed to your house weekly. So it's not like we're trying to, break your pockets or anything. We're doing this because it's a passion of ours.
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I think that it is important that newspapers have a print edition for several reasons, some of which you've touched upon. But I'm wondering if, from an economic perspective, this is a viable option in the 21st century. We're recording this in February of 2023, and I love the print edition, and I hope that it remains this way for many, many years. But do you think it is, from an economic standpoint, a viable option?
I don't deal with the economics of it, but I do know that people love reading books, and they love reading paper books. People love a paper newspaper. I feel good about the product because it's recyclable and things like that. Animal shelters need the newspapers for things. You need it for moving. It's not, sometimes they go in the trash, but a lot of times they are recycled. And people want to hold a newspaper. They want to cut it out and frame it. They want to put the article about their kids on the fridge. It's different than reading a Facebook post.
Absolutely. And do you think that you were talking about the fact, that people should be paying for the news and should, be subscribing to newspapers and things like that? Do you think that in the digital age, since the internet has come about, do you think that has somehow cheapened the content and the formats of journalism or not? How do you feel about that?
I feel like we're almost going in a circle, and we're going back to how it used to be, especially in Jackson. When social media first started to become popular and people realized they could put news on it, immediately these TV stations, radio stations, newspapers were like, well, what are we about to do? People are about to start getting their news for free. We can't stay in business if people are getting their news for free. Cuts are made. The quality of the product is diminished. a multitude of things happen when, there's just that mindset going on. But as we're seeing in Jackson and the lack of information that we see and the intentional information, people crave news and they crave good news. And I'm not saying good like this is happy news. I'm saying good as in its quality. And you're seeing that circle, it's coming back around and people are like, I won't pay for it so I know what I'm getting.
Now you're working for a newspaper. You were working for the television station before. You worked for radio stations, when you started getting interested in journalism. What differences do you see between the television and working for a newspaper where you're actually writing something that somebody's not going to see but is going to read?
It's really interesting. So, I started working at writing for newspapers and then radio, and then I interned at a newspaper, and then I went to a TV station, now I'm back at a newspaper. And there's a couple of things that I've noticed. And the reason I wanted to get into television news is because I wanted to work with a new medium. I thought writing and photography was so cool when I was interning at the newspaper, because at the Courier in Savannah, when I interned there, they let me roll free. They let me do whatever I wanted to do. And so I was able to be very creative with it. Then at the radio station, working with the professors at UT Martin is kind of the same thing. But this time, along with text and voice, I was able to insert sound. And working with sound and tone and undertone is also really interesting. At the TV station, you're now inserting video. And how are you going to tell this story with visuals? Some stories are really hard to tell with visuals. And now I'm using all of that experience and bringing it back into text and print. And so something you learn in TV is write like you talk. Newspaper people don't write like they talk. But now that I've worked at a TV station, that's how I've been trained to do. So now I'm bringing that back into print. So there's a lot of different things with that going on. And I've been told over and over again how, people are like, oh, your article was really easy to read. I really liked reading this. The story was told really well. It's like, yeah, because when I'm typing it, most of the time I'm saying it out loud too, just because that's how I've been trained.
So did you have to go through a small, at least, period of transition from one format to the other?
Mentally a little bit of like figuring it out, tweaking your style just a little bit, and going from the way that you type a TV story for because when you make a television story, you're really using that type for your script and for closed captioning. So that the people who can't hear at home are able to read what's going on. And that's a lot different than having to, write out a story and you're having to put in all those descriptors and say what happened. You can't show the audience clapping. You have to say that they clapped. And making that fit in good with the flow of how you tell a story.
How different do you think it is for the person receiving the news? Do you think that written news is more conducive to, critical thinking about the news, or, because you're not watching something, you're reading something, you can go back to it, reread it, have you thought about that ever?
Yes. And that's one of the reasons I love print, because in television, you got a minute and a half to get your point across. Like it or leave it. You got 1 minute, 30 seconds, and that goes by really, really fast. And so with print, I'm able to put in so much more information. I can put in the exact numbers from this amendment to city council, or I'm able to put in like the exact address to where this happened and quote the police report exactly how it needs to be quoted, instead of just, trying to convey that as best I can. So I'm able to get a lot more technical information in there. I don't have to be as general with it. I also have a lot more space.
Now, the Jackson Post, newspaper in town, when I'm thinking about the newspaper, and I have read some of the issues, I wonder, what do you think is the intended readership of this type of new newspaper in a city that has had a newspaper, which is the Jackson Sun, for a long period of time. What do you think about that as you are preparing this project, as you are writing the articles? What is the intended readership of the Jackson Post?
Like most news organizations, that intended readership is going to be the people who buy the most stuff, who have the wallets in their family. So that's typically women aged 26 to 54. That they're the ones who spend the money, and so the advertisers really want to go towards that demographic. While we are on that a little bit, I mean, I'm 26 years old, so I'm writing about things that I care about a lot of times. There's also certain things that just have to be covered, things that you care about, your money, your safety, the people that you elect. So you have to do that a little bit too. And then we're also going towards people who just care about our community. We want people to feel invested in our local schools, our local sports, what's going on in their neighborhoods. So it's people who are already actively seeking out information are the ones that we're really going towards, and we're making it easy for them to find that information.
And in what ways do you think that the Jackson Post is consciously different from the Jackson Sun?
I could say how we're different than the other media in town.
Just because I just said the Sun simply
you're okay,
because it's another newspaper.
Absolutely, no, I understand.
Yeah, I'll rephrase it from the other media in town. Yes,
we're very intentional with how we cover certain subjects, and I wrote an op-ed about this a couple weeks ago. But we had some really, really hurtful crimes and situations in Jackson in the month of January. And something that I really appreciate about Brandon and appreciate about this being a new newspaper with no precedent being set. We're making it up as we go along. How are we going to do this? Well, let's decide. We're able to feel these stories. These aren't just stories, they're people. So we're able to feel the situations. And I think that's a really big thing. We're also, both of us, very invested in this community already. It's not a big corporation bringing folks from out of town who are having to learn the lay of the land. For the most part, we understand the lay of the land. And so we already know a lot of these people, and we have relationships with them. You want to believe how much better of a story that you can get from folks when you have a good relationship with them. You see them at the farmer's market, at church, at wherever. And you're already friends. Like you go to dinner with them, things like that. And you're able to get a story much easier and also tell it a lot better. And so I think because we're so invested in this community and there's no precedent set, that we're able to cover things a lot differently than our competitors.
And I've seen you walking your dogs around the farmer's market at least a couple of times. So
they're crazy.
What role do you see the Jackson Post as having in Jackson? In the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Because when you start a new newspaper, you probably have certain assumptions or hopes for the future of this enterprise.
Newspapers actually have a really interesting dynamic in the history of a community. And there's actually some laws centered around newspapers and how they deal with governmental bodies. So your county typically has a newspaper of record for the county. And that is the newspaper that public notices are put in, that the governmental agencies are required to do certain things and post public information in these newspapers because they're the newspaper of record. And that newspaper is typically labeled by, it must be in that county for more than a year and have the most subscribers. So we got some goals. So becoming the newspaper of record, I think, is one of our goals. And then just continuing to build a community around our newspaper. I think there's a certain type of energy. There's a certain type of community that is centered around local news and how people interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think building that positive relationship with the community is really what we're going for.
Mm. Tell us a little bit about the staff that works with you. You said before they were, a little crazy, a little intense, and how would you describe the people that you're working with? Who are they?
Well, the crazy and intense, you're looking at me. That is me.
That's not a problem.
Well, basically, we have Daniel, the owner, and then Brandon, the editor, and then me, and I'm the staff writer and marketing director. Mm-hmm. And Daniel up in Camden, he has some people who do layout and design and sales for multiple papers. And we interact with them a little bit, but the people who are on staff at the Jackson Post, it's literally me and Brandon. Mm-hmm. And Brandon is letting me run wild in this county. He's letting me do whatever I want to do, basically.
Is that, again, an overwhelming situation in some cases? Is that like a daunting kind of endeavor?
The sky's the limit. And so far, it hasn't been daunting, but now that you say it.
Well, I don't want to make it daunting.
No, it's really cool because I've had questions about certain things in our county. I've had things that I've wanted to talk about, things that I've wanted to research. And he said, do it. Go for it. Spend your time doing what you need to do. And if there's one thing that I'm passionate about, it's local news. So I'm able to go on shows like this, talk with different people, and really share with them why this is so important. And so far, it hasn't been overwhelming because I love it so much.
I can see that. I think that's obvious from just talking to you about it, and that you really love your work, and that's always a plus and something really important when you're doing something like this. Do you think, Julia, that it is important for a city like Jackson, Tennessee, to grow even further? If a city like Jackson wants to grow even further, do you think it is important to have a vibrant local journalistic scene? And if so, why?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Now let me figure out how.
Sounds like a rhetorical question.
It was a little bit, because obviously. So, I think competition is great. Mm-hmm. I think for there to be one TV station and one newspaper in this community, which are going after different subjects. So it's not like if they're really competition. Without competition, you don't have growth. You need growth. You need challenges. You need to push yourself. Mm-hmm. So I think that is something that journalism in this community desperately needs. And also, I think the community itself desperately needs it, because without that information, that vital information, intentional quality information about your community, you don't know what's going on. You don't know where to go vote, where you can get services if you're in a tough situation, what the hospital is doing, what the police department is doing. And a lot of times journalism is considered the fourth branch of government, mm-hmm. because we're the ones who hold public officials accountable when it's most needed. Mm-hmm. And someone who works for the mayor last week, and I like to say I have a good relationship with the mayor's office, they said, you know what? You're tough. You are a tough reporter, but you are fair. Mm-hmm. And that was the biggest compliment that I can get.
How difficult is it to be fair as a journalist at a time when sometimes the public has the feeling that things are incredibly polarized, after things like, it probably begins with 9/11 years ago, mm-hmm. but, after the pandemic, I think this has been stronger and easier to see. How difficult is it for a reporter working for BBJ or working for a newspaper to be fair?
Fairness is a really subjective term sometimes, and it goes back to the situation of equity and equality. Mm. So a lot of times people are like, I want equality, I want equal coverage, this, that, and the other. Well, equality is different for different people. And a lot of times that comes into the diversity trainings that you go through. Mm-hmm. If a 5-foot tall person doesn't need the same support as a 6-foot tall person to see over the fence. And I think the same thing goes back to news coverage when you're looking at equitable and equability. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. And if someone is lying to me, I'm not going to say in there, this is what they said, just to have equal coverage. It needs to be equitable. It needs to have context. Having equitable coverage is what we're shooting for. And making sure that the coverage, while it is objective, is getting to the point of the matter and not just saying he said, she said, just to have what's called equal coverage. It needs to be equitable.
So in that sense, the journalist has to be active in making those decisions, right?
And a lot of it's nuances. It's a lot of backstories. It's a lot of understanding the history of communities. And I think that's a lot of the contention that journalists get right now is, well, you're saying that this person is lying, or you're giving more attention to this rather than this. And it's, well, this is the reason why. And that it has to be equitable.
You mentioned social media before, right? And in the time of TikTok and YouTube and all of these platforms, Twitter and Facebook, which seems to be for older people these days, right? People like me, maybe, I don't know. But in the time of all of these developments, what do you think is important to do for a journalist, for somebody who works at a newspaper? What do you think is important to do in order to get young people interested in reading the news instead of just getting the news from whatever source that may or may not work in the way that you're talking about?
Absolutely. So I've done some research into this lately, actually. And there's two categories of news consumers. There's people who search out news, seekers, and there's people who bump into news, and they call them bumpers. Most young people, and I'm talking younger millennials and Gen Zers, they're bumpers. They're bumping into news wherever it lands. And then older people tend to be the seekers who are seeking out the news. So as a young millennial and Gen Z person, it's kind of, but I'm a new seeker. So it's still kind of figuring out, okay, how does the Facebook algorithm work? How do I engage with people on TikTok, which is what I'm trying to figure out right now? And Twitter and Instagram and all those different sources, because you want to be on as many of those as possible so that people will bump into you and maybe like what you have to say.
Yeah, I think that's important because it doesn't always depend on us. There are certain structures like those algorithms and anything having to do with search engines and things like that
and
you have to
something
bear
else
in
that I
mind.
think is really important to how we live right now is that we're technically a subscription service. People love a good subscription service and getting something in the mail every week that's not, a bill or something like that. So labeling ourselves as a subscription service is also a really good tactic that we're using.
Do you think that in a way that's going against the grain of what journalism is these days in 2023?
Well, we also, going against the grain, we started this newspaper in 2022. A little bit because I think a lot of the media is just letting whatever happen, and they're not actively trying to get back into people's homes.
Now, we are in Jackson, and this is not a big city, but not a small town. It might be a city that has a small town feel, but it's not necessarily a small town like, say, Martin or Savannah, right? In this kind of context, in a city like this, what difficulties, if any, have you guys encountered as you were working to get this project underway? Maybe there were none.
As with any, I guess we're considered a startup. There's those technical issues of getting the subscriber base, making sure the website's working properly, things like that. And then I think another thing is like a small town that's had, the same couple of media outlets for the last 50 years, just, breaking that wall down, letting them know that it's okay to enjoy something else. It's okay to support a different news outlet that's not the ones that you've been watching for the last 50, 60 years.
Hmm. And what challenges do you envision that may lie ahead?
Yeah.
Because like you said, you began in 2022, so not that long ago,
I think,
and we hope that
yeah.
there's a long life to this newspaper.
I think it's going to be getting and retaining subscribers
Hmm.
because people are like, yeah, I support you. I support you. Okay, go subscribe. Like I can see the list of people who subscribed. And so be sure it's like the voter list. Like I can see if you voted.
Hmm.
Like go vote, go subscribe. So I think getting and retaining those subscribers just so while people say that they support you, they're actually investing in you as
Hmm.
well to make sure that the quality news coverage continues.
What outlets do you use in order to publicize this new newspaper?
So we've been going and speaking at different organizations. We've been sending the product in the mail to different neighborhoods. We've been doing some Facebook advertising just so people bump into us.
Hmm.
We have newspapers located at several different gas stations in town as well. And we're really just trying to, get in front of people. And I think I have a really good base, and so does Brandon, because we are well known in this community already.
The Jackson Post. Tell us, Julia, how people out there watching this or listening to this can actually go out and get this newspaper and actually subscribe to it.
So we're, like I said, we're located at most gas stations around Jackson, and then you can go to our website, jacksonpost.news, and we have a little subscribe button. So click it, fill out the info, pay the $50, and you'll be subscribed. It'll be showing up at your door.
jacksonpost.news. And as we're winding down the conversation, I do have a question that has to do a little bit with the current affairs here in Jackson, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if somebody's watching this a year from now or a couple of years from now, this will not matter as much, or they'll think it's a little bit anachronistic. But you mentioned the mayor before,
Mm-hmm.
and we are at a moment when a mayoral race is getting underway here in Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what challenges and what issues do you think will be most relevant for the candidate that gets eventually elected. And we know there are a couple that have already announced they're running for mayor. A new person that hadn't done it before, a couple that have done it before, including, of course, the mayor that we have right now, Scott Conger. What challenges, what issues do you think will be most relevant for whomever gets elected at the end of the race?
So, yes, so far we have 6 people who have pulled petitions at the Election Commission to run for mayor. Only 2 so far have submitted those.
Mm-hmm.
Those are Scott Conger and Daryl Hubbard, who is currently the city court clerk. Ray Condre announced his candidacy over the weekend as well. And I think it'll probably be coming down to 4 people running for mayor out of the 6 people who have pulled petitions. I think the biggest issues during the race that are going to come up is going to be, number one, I really think it's going to be the drag show that was held back in October of this year. It's been very contentious. Ray Condre, who announced his candidacy, says he's not running because of the drag show, but he was one of the main proponents against it. And he's one of the people who fought it and did all that type of stuff. So that's really interesting. And then, of course, Daryl Hubbard has also faced some issues with the city court clerk's office and things like that. There's been some arrests made in his office. They're facing some major employee retention problems. So those are really interesting. And then on the flip side, Scott Conger has faced a lot of opposition for the way he handled the pandemic, drag show, things like that. So those are kind of going to be, that's the baseline for the race. Going into the next term, we have Blue Oval City coming to West Tennessee. If you go into any meeting right now in Jackson and Madison County, Blue Oval City, Dixie plant, because the paper cup plant's coming to Jackson. So there's a lot of that going on, and it's kind of scrambling to make sure everything is ready because there wasn't a lot of preparation on the front end of this announcement. And then things people just always want to see is fiscal responsibility, getting their roads taken care of, make sure their trash is picked up. So those are really big things that I know I'm leaving stuff out, but off the top of my head, those are going to be the big talking points.
Now, as a final question, Julia, I'm wondering, when you are, planning a newspaper like this, how do you see the balance between having news in there, since this is something that readers receive weekly, and maybe some of the news happened, let's say, 7 days ago, 5 days ago, what is the balance when it comes to, or how do you find a balance when you come to choosing what to put in there and what to leave out, and also news versus opinion pieces?
I think a lot of it comes down to mine and Brandon's experience with news judgment and what we think should go in there. Like, oh, hey, this was important, this was important, this was important. And then some things, if you flip through the newspaper, you can see those ended up in the brief sections where it's just, a couple of sentences in there. And so that's kind of how we pick the news, I guess. And sometimes things did happen a week ago. If we try our best to get it in, but the way that the printing works, it's really difficult to. And then B, the opinion pieces. I try my best to write opinion pieces that are about the way that we do our work. So you can see a little bit behind the scenes. And Brandon will talk about anything that he wants to. So just whoever really wants to write an opinion piece is allowed to right now, and that might change later. Like I said earlier, we're making it up as we go.
How important do you think it is for a newspaper to be transparent about things like how the newspaper works?
I think it's, obviously I'm writing about it, so I think it's very important to give people that behind the scenes look, and I also think it humanizes us. So when I talk about, hey, this girl just died in a shooting, should I call her mother? That's a real conversation that Brandon and I had. So being transparent about that and letting them know, like, hey, we struggle with a lot of the things that we have to do our job. It's okay that we struggle, but we want you to know that this is what's going on, and we're doing it, but we're human.
Well, I can tell you, Julia, it really has been a pleasure for me to get to talk to you.
Thank you.
In a context that's outside of a classroom.
Absolutely.
All these years later, I'm really happy that there is a new newspaper in town. I'm definitely going to be subscribing to it and looking forward to getting it in the mail every week, and I would like to encourage everyone out there to do the same and give it a try and then see what they think. Just one more time, remind us where this Jackson Post can be found.
So follow us on Facebook. It's the Jackson Post. You can also find us at most gas stations around Jackson, and go to our website, jacksonpost.news.
Julia Ewoldt, local journalist here in Jackson, Tennessee. She's been our guest on Roundabout Town, our podcast here on YouTube. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, coming to you live from the Downtown Public Library here in Jackson, Tennessee, Jackson Madison County Public Library. Best of luck to you, Julia, and at any point, if you want to come back to be on our show, it'll be my pleasure to have you anytime.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. And everybody out there, if you have any question, any comment, leave it just underneath the video, and we'll be happy to respond. Once again, our guest was Julia Ewoldt, who has founded the Jackson Post, new newspaper here in town in Jackson, Tennessee. Thank you very much for listening, and so long, everybody.